Hard set rules can be helpful when mixing, especially if you're new or you're still figuring out how to approach a project. However, some rules are so limiting and so strict that they need to be questioned, not just to break norms, but for the sake of restoring the creativity that the best mixing engineers embrace. So, let's look at some of these rules, particularly ones I notice are still followed, and discuss when and why they should be broken. So let's jump into popular mixing rules that need to go away. And quick side note, if you use some of these methods or you adhere to these rules, I'm not critiquing you in any way. It's your mix and you don't need someone to tell you what you can and you can't do. It's really not my place. If that's the case though, maybe just consider the points I'm making and share why these rules work or don't work for you and your projects. Let's start with using pink noise as a reference. Pink noise is logarithmic. In other words, it mimics how we hear. The amplitude of the frequency ranges doesn't match, but for our hearing, it makes all ranges sound as if they're roughly the same loudness. For this reason, it became a common practice to create a track with pink noise playing, observe the frequency response, and then enable or adjust the amplitude of various tracks to see how they compare. The idea being, the kick, bass, snare, vocal, guitar, whatever, should culminate in a response that matches pink noise as closely as possible. So if my kick is causing 60 Hz to go above the level of the pink noise at 60 Hz, then I should turn down the kick or attenuate 60 Hz on the kick to help it match the pink noise response. Now on the surface, this makes sense. It should, in theory, make it easy to hear most parts of the composition. But the main issue is that compositions differ. Many don't have the instrumentation to fill the full frequency spectrum. Furthermore, it homogenizes or removes any unique characteristics of a mix. If I were mixing a rock track, then later worked on a hip-hop track and I followed this rule, then two very different genres with listeners that expect different frequency responses would be treated identically. Although I have other reasons for not liking this rule, another big issue comes up with dynamics. Now, a song includes various instruments coming and going with different rhythms. Conversely, pink noise is static. If you're a newer engineer and you're using this method, it's easy to attempt to recreate the frequency response of pink noise at a point where it makes no sense for the song. I shouldn't try to make the vocal cover frequencies that another instrument is responsible for simply because that instrument isn't present. Furthermore, I shouldn't make an instrument sound unnaturally bright or unnaturally heavy and low frequencies simply to cover the response. So in short, genres have unique responses, compositions have unique responses and dynamics, so simplifying everything to this extent doesn't make much sense in most situations. Now here's a mix with its original response, and let's compare it to one that I've adjusted to match pink noise. Let me know if you think one sounds better than the other. The next rule is your channel faders can't be higher than the master fader. Now I see this one causing some folks anxiety on online forums. This is a rule from the Mixing Engineer's Handbook, so I think when people read it, they think they've been messing up their mixes for years. In the book, the author states that channel faders should not be higher than the subgroup or bus faders. Furthermore, the bus or subgroup faders should not be higher than the master fader. The idea here is that if the signal is too high, as it's routed to the output, it'll overload the channel, causing distortion. Now this is true for lower to moderate quality analog mixing consoles that have less headroom, but it's not too relevant to modern DAWs. In a DAW, the routing is slightly different and the headroom throughout the signal path is insanely high. Since DAWs use 64-bit processing for individual channels and during summing, the only time clipping can occur is when the output clips at 0 dB or above. As the tracks are summed to either a bus or the stereo output, 64-bit processing still applies, meaning the signal can go well above 0 dB without clipping while it's being summed. After it's summed, clipping can happen. So if you lower the stereo output, so long as the meter isn't indicating that it's clipping, then there's no clipping occurring. The exception to this is if you have a plugin on the output that clips at 0 dB. Some plugins let you enable or disable clipping at 0 dB, like the Oxford Inflator, whereas some will always clip above 0 dB, like this PSP Vintage Warmer. If you have a plugin like this on a bus or a stereo output, then yes, you'll need to ensure that the summed signal doesn't go above 0 dB if you want to avoid clipping from that particular plugin. Now to show this, I'll sum signals that exceed 0 dB and route them into PSP Vintage Warmer, at which point you'll be able to hear clipping. Then I'll disable this plugin. The sum signal still exceeds 0 dB, but since I've turned down the stereo output, no clipping will occur. Real quick, Sage Audio is an analog mastering service. We've been around for 20 years, and mastering with us starts at $49 a track. There's a link in the description and an ad at the end of the video if you'd like to learn more. Next, let's discuss you need EQ before compression, or vice versa. I'm not going to give this one a lengthy explanation. In short, it depends on the circumstance. If I want to control the response before compression, maybe I want to ensure that sibilance isn't aggressive once the compressor's makeup gain is used, then I could use EQ first to attenuate that range. Or, if I want to compress a signal without anything changed, I can compress and then shape it afterward with EQ. Maybe I want to do an emphasis-de-emphasis technique. In that case, I could use EQ to amplify a range, then use compression, and then another EQ to attenuate the range that I amplified. This way, the compressor works harder on a set of frequencies, giving me a slightly different timbre, and then I balance the response after. So it genuinely doesn't matter. Just do what's best for the situation. So let's listen to EQ before compression and then compression before EQ, used for two different purposes and to achieve slightly different timbres. Last up, let's cover you should tune your vocals. Now this one isn't so much a rule as it is an expectation. In a time where tuning a vocal or vocals has become the norm, it almost feels like you're skipping a step when you don't tune. But like all forms of processing, it's either a practical or a creative choice for you, the engineer, to make. A perfectly in-tune performance may or may not support the intention of the song, just like how a perfectly in-time performance may or may not support this intention. And just like how I don't want everything I listen to be quantized, I don't want every vocal to have perfect pitch with truncated vibrato and, let's be honest, noticeable artifacts. Now it's true no matter how good tuners have gotten, they still negatively impact the transients through minor to moderate phase interference. Now since tuners or tuning usually occur before other processing, these artifacts become much more aggressive as the mix progresses and quieter details of the vocal are amplified. So, if you want tuned vocals, or maybe vocals that purposefully sound tuned, then tuning is the right choice for your project. If you don't, then don't tune. Get professional analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Tulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating masters that don't accurately translate what you hear in your head when you could instantly fix a problem by clicking the link in the description and working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? We've mastered thousands of songs that accurately translate what each client hears in their head, and it'll work for you too. Click the link in the description now and get direct access to us for personalized analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head.